Thank you. My name is Luke Viner. I am the Labour candidate for South Cambridgeshire. And I want to give you a little bit of background about who I am first, because I think it's obviously the most important thing to start off with. I actually moved here to South Cambridgeshire about 5 years ago, so just before the pandemic, for work. I currently live in Fulbourn, and I have been working in the North Cambridge area in cybersecurity and tech and security for the past 5 years. And it's a fantastic opportunity to do all that. I'm also a parish councillor in Fulbourn. I've been on the parish council for a bit of time, and I understand the importance of having a really local representative who understands the needs of the community, working directly with the community to get things done. Now, the reason I'm doing this, and this is something that really wasn't in my life plan at all, but the reason I'm doing this are very similar reasons why I joined the Labour Party in the first place. And that's primarily because I grew up under a Labour government. And this will be the only time I mention my age, I promise. But I was born in 1997, about 20 days after Tony Blair got elected. And because of that, it meant that the first part of my life, I grew up under a Labour government. And it's only really when I became an adult, and I look back on my time growing up, that I actually understood what that really meant and the things that it had an influence on me in my life and my family. You know, I didn't come from very privileged upbringings at all. My dad was self-employed, still is, self-employed carpenter, works pretty much 6 days a week. My mum stayed at home at the time and looked after us, so we didn't have a lot of money to go around. But that government was there to help us around when we did need it. When I went to school, when I went to primary school, my class sizes were under 30. You know, my teachers were there working and not on strike because they were paid decently, and we had good relationships with the unions at that time. You know, when my teachers went to school, they didn't have to go to Asda and Tesco to buy school supplies because the local authorities had funded the schools correctly, and they were able to do that. I had an NHS that was there for me whenever I needed it. I was able to get a GP, my parents were able to get me GP appointments within 48 hours. I had asthma and eczema and other little things growing up. I was able to get the services I needed because the NHS was working under the last Labour government. Things like child tax credit were very important to us as well. You know, for a lot of families, it might have been the difference between going hungry or heating their home that day. In the case of my family, that was maybe the difference between possibly going out for a meal on one evening every 3 months, or going to a farm on a weekend. Tiny little memories that I'm able to look back on. It made a really huge difference on my life. Basically, every single Labour government we've had has really put forward institutional changes to this country that have benefited working people. From 1945, when we introduced the National Health Service, 1964, when we had big social reforms in this country, 1997, the minimum wage, child tax credit, paternity pay, maternity leave, it all matters so much. And as part of this community, I want to make sure that I'm a present MP, somebody who you could approach and talk to in the street if you needed to, somebody who would have an office in the constituency that's always local and accessible, possibly roaming around the different villages. Obviously, it's quite a rural constituency. But I want to be a present and good MP for every single person in this constituency. And I also want 2024 to be the opportunity that South Cambridgeshire gets to elect a Labour MP that, fingers crossed, we'll wait and see what happens on the 4th of July, but fingers crossed can work with a Labour government to really put investment in this community and to really get Britain its future back. So I do hope you enjoy the rest of this evening. I'm sure you'll get a chance to ask a load of questions, and obviously there's a few prepared as well. But thank you very much, and I'll pass on to the next person. Thank you.
My name's James Gordon, and I'm an independent candidate. That means I don't represent any party. This year, out of about 4,500 candidates, there are 461 independent candidates. That's quite a considerable number. I'm part of a platform called the Independent Platform. We've got about 15 independent candidates, and we've got a website where we all have posted our CVs and our values. Our values are essentially centrist. Our values are essentially that we, like magpies, use the best ideas of the other parties rather than present a slate to you. We represent the communities that we live in. Personally, I've lived in South Cambridgeshire for 22 years now. And my day job, I have two jobs. In fact, one is most agreeable and enjoyable as a lawyer, and the other is most agreeable and enjoyable as a hotelier. I help run a law firm which is now owned by its employees on the sort of John Lewis model. And I also run a small chain of hotels with my two brothers and my sister. The reason I'm standing is that I'm part of quite considerable number of people in this country that is utterly dissatisfied with the political system. The Independent Platform commissioned a survey by Omnia, who questioned over 2,500 people. Of those, 57% said that they would consider voting independent. And 47% said that they would think that they would be likely to be dissatisfied with the political parties after the election. Traditionally, we have a turnout of about 70%, and traditionally the winning party gets in the upper 40% in terms of the popular vote. So about 30% of people vote for the party that claims victory, and about 30% of people stay at home, and about 40% of people vote against the party that claims an overwhelming victory. I think it's likely that Keir Starmer will sweep the ballot with over 400 MPs, and he will claim, on the strength of a minority of the popular vote, that he has an overwhelming mandate. I don't think that's right. I think a sprinkling of a few independent voices would be a good thing in Parliament. I have nothing against any of the five parties or many of the candidates that they put forward. We had Hustings last night, and I was incredibly impressed with the enthusiasm and sincerity of the five other candidates in this race. But I do think, if you, like me, are a little bit dissatisfied with the political classes, a little bit dissatisfied with the way that political parties treat you, you have got an opportunity. I'm not sufficiently deluded to think that I will sweep to victory. Indeed, if you go on the betting sites, you'll find there's an 8-to-1 favourite in this race. I think it's probable that that 8-to-1 favourite will win in a 6-horse race, and the other 5 will end up as runners-up. But I think it's worth considering voting independent, and that's why I'm standing.
Thanks so much for coming along. It is great to see so many people here, fully engaged in the process of deciding who you're going to vote to represent our area in Parliament after the 4th of July. The political decisions made in Westminster make such a huge difference to all of our lives and to the way our society functions. So we owe it to ourselves and to future generations to choose wisely. Last night, we were all 6 of us in Luke's own village of Fulbourn, where we were given a very warm and respectful welcome. Tonight, I feel this is very much my own home fixture. I see many familiar faces around, which is nice. And while we do all expect and welcome robust challenge, I very much hope that we will all show my fellow candidates how civilised and respectful we are around here. Many of you here will know that I've been an active member of the Stapleford and Shelford scene for about 13 years. Since moving here, conveniently just before my son started primary school, which was the perfect timing for getting stuck into village life, I'm meeting lots of fellow parents who've become very good friends. I've also made some very good friends among the slightly older generation, originally through having joined the Stapleford Strollers, which are the monthly walking group, which I still go on and plan and lead walks once a year. And of course, anyone of you who was ever in touch with the Magog Trust any time between 2012 and 2022 will have seen my name on all those letters and emails over that 10-year period. I was the self-employed one-woman office team for the Magog Down, helping to keep that wonderful area running, serving its foundational purpose of conservation and quiet recreation. What you may not realise is that, in fact, my links to Shelford go back not just those 13 years, but over 30 years. I grew up in the Thames Valley and came up to Cambridge to study in the late 80s. My parents were already nomadic at that stage and renting because our home had been repossessed by the bank. Then, 2 terms into my first year of study, they separated. So there really was no home for me to go back to. That's why I made Cambridge my home for the long vacations, getting various jobs to tide me over. In my second year at university, my mother found a residential job at a private school in Little Shelford. It's called Kirby Lodge, some of you may remember it. And then, the following year, she bought a flat in Great Shelford, where she lived for 20 years, over 20 years. So all that time when I was living in Cambridge after graduation, I was also gently plugged into the Shelford life through my mother. One year I went with her on a large group to Bernay on a twinning trip, which was quite an experience. Those French people are something else. Anyway, why stand now, and why the Green Party? My friends will know that I've been wanging on about climate and environment matters for a very long time. One, and now very dear friend, actually recently reminded me that the first words I ever spoke to her was when I was telling her off for dropping her children to the primary school in the car. I walk the walk and I cycle my cycle. And I actually do use the buses to go all sorts of places rather than just complaining that they're unreliable. After years of small-scale local activism and a fair amount of reading about economics and the links between monetary growth and climate breakdown, I realised that the Green Party is the only party which embraces the need to put climate action and social justice at the very heart of all our policies. So I'm standing for election now because I want to be part of making the better, fairer decisions. The presence of Green Party MPs in Westminster after the 4th of July will offer everyone in the country real hope and real change.
Thank you very much, and it's lovely to be here, for all of us to be able to share a little bit more about our lives and why we're standing and what we're standing for. I'm a mum, and I moved to South Cambridgeshire in 2012 with my husband and my 2 children. But as you might be able to tell from my accent every now and then, I come from Hull in the East Riding of Yorkshire. And it was from these deep roots with my mum was a staff nurse and she worked nights in the local hospital, and my dad was a GP. And it was by accompanying him, my dad, on home visits to families that the GPs used to do from a very early age that I got this strong sense of community service. But also behind the closed doors, those front doors, the many different lives that are behind there, and the deep inequalities that exist within our society and our communities. And I think it's that which drove me then in my career, was to work in developing countries, to work with local communities, to reduce poverty, but also from very early on to tackle climate change, the ravages of climate change that were affecting countries in East Africa, in South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. But then coming here in 2012, it's also that local community spirit. I got into volunteering to lead the girls' football team, and then to step up and speak up for the local community by getting elected to the district council in 2018, and then re-elected for a second term in 2022. And it's all of those, I think, shape the values of the 3 things that I'm campaigning on to be your MP. And those are things that I know resonate with many residents around the constituency, because I've talked to literally thousands of you since Rishi Sunak called the snap election. Firstly, I care deeply about the NHS and social care. After 14 years of chaos and neglect from the Conservative government, the NHS is on life support. Over 6 million people in pain on waiting lists. In a survey that I did across South Cambridgeshire, 6 out of 10 of those who responded saying they were struggling to get something even as simple as a GP appointment. And thousands nationally waiting for urgent cancer treatment. Yes, urgent cancer treatment, waiting months. Now I know what that feels like, because it was the amazing doctors and nurses at Addenbrooke's that saved my husband's life when he was unexpectedly diagnosed with leukemia. And every day counts. If his diagnosis had come any later, then his chances would have been very slim indeed. I've talked to the professionals around here, talked to the GPs and those who are in emergency medicine. And I would like to say that the Lib Dem manifesto is one that is to fix the NHS crisis by putting adult social care at its centre. And I'd like to talk to you more about that this evening. Second priority is about our local environment, and I have fought and worked for years to help restore nature. I'm very proud that our Lib Dem manifesto has been celebrated by national environmental organisations as one that recognises both the nature and climate crises and how they're interconnected with our societal inequalities. Here across South Cambridgeshire, we've loved our local spaces, green spaces where my husband went walking to get his strength back, and the bluebell woods. There are chalk streams vibrant with life. And locally, I have already worked to make sure we stop sewage. Thank you very much.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is a delight to be here in, can you hear me all right, in the beautiful village of Shelford. Now, my sister lives in this village and is in fact in the audience here tonight. So if you hear a solitary yet enthusiastic clap at the end of my answers, you will know where that is coming from. I thank her for her service this evening. I want to start with, as Pippa has actually, a personal story, which is in relation to my nephew Daniel. So Daniel was 1 when he was diagnosed with a rare form of kidney cancer. And again, very similar to Pippa's story, it was the excellent medical staff, initially at Antony, but then over at Great Ormond Street, who helped save his life. And he had to have part of both of his kidneys removed. And I'm very pleased to say that his prognosis now is very positive. And I think if you have that sort of experience firsthand with our NHS, you see what a truly fantastic institution it is. And many of us, I know, in this room have relied upon it and will rely upon it in future years. And that is why, as a government, it has received record investment over the course of this Parliament. One of the issues that we got onto last night that I want to touch on is the pay and conditions of our NHS staff. Now, in Hertfordshire, if you are a doctor or a nurse, you will receive a higher allowance because of where you live than doctors and nurses here in Cambridgeshire, sometimes to the tune of over £2,000. And I think that is wrong. Antony Brown, the sitting Member of Parliament for this area, has run a campaign on it, which I'm very proud to now be continuing. Obviously, the cost of living in our area is, some would say, higher, and there is data to support that, than across the border in Hertfordshire. So I'm campaigning on that. I've seen firsthand what our excellent NHS can do. And as your Member of Parliament, I would always put supporting them and the brave men and women who work within it first. I want to touch on a few. I said last night it would be really good to touch on some of the key environmental issues that face this constituency, and I said I'm sure we'll have time to do so, and sadly we didn't, so I'm going to take this opportunity to make sure we do. Now, some of my opponents are going to say some things about the last 14 years of Conservative government, and I'm not going to stand up here and pretend that everything has gone to plan. That would be absurd. We've had a very difficult time in government, we've had the war in Ukraine, we've had COVID, we've been dealt an extremely bad hand. That is not to say that we could not have done better on certain policy areas and that their implementation could not have been more effective. But the decision you have here is whether or not you are going to entrust your vote to a Conservative who is standing on a proven track record on the environment, who grew up here, who lives in this constituency, who helped farmland in and around Comberton and knows how difficult it is for our farmers to put food on our table, or whether or not you're going to listen and believe some of the environmental rhetoric that you're going to hear this evening. Because the Liberal Democrats are saying, trust us, we're the party for the environment. Yet, Honey Hill, their support for East West Rail cutting through 13 villages and all of that environment and countryside, their position on CSET, which I very much hope, as it affects so many in the local area, we're able to cover here this evening. Their position on C2C, which I described previously as a perfect example of both economic and environmental vandalism. That's exactly what it is. We need to hold people to account. It is the Liberal Democrats who are running our local council. It is the Liberal Democrats who are paying people 5 days pay to now just work 4 days. And I'm speaking to people who think that this is just unjust when their council tax has been put up this year by the maximum amount possible. I've spoken to elderly people in this village who are unable to access the pavements and the roads because of the terrible state they are in. And the Liberal Democrats are in power here. So if you're after change, you should vote Conservative here.